The zombie virus had overtaken Las Vegas, and Nick, along with his girlfriend Molly, was desperately fleeing the city, heading toward the airport in hopes of catching a flight out of the country to safety. However, midway through their escape, Molly suddenly became ill, violently vomiting without warning. After a few moments of recovery, they prepared to continue on their way, only to realize that the car's tires had gotten stuck in the gravel, and no amount of revving the engine could free them. As Nick was about to call a friend at the airport for help, Molly let out a terrified scream. Not far from them, a zombie was slowly but steadily approaching. Nick quickly grabbed his handgun from the car, but in his panic, his phone slipped from his hand and fell to the ground. There was no time to retrieve it. He focused on the threat, firing at the zombie. One shot, a second shot. Finally, the third bullet hit its mark, and the zombie collapsed. Molly, visibly relieved and thrilled by Nick's accuracy, praised his sharp shooting and jokingly promised him a reward, a kiss. However, the zombie hadn't truly been taken down. To Nick and Molly's horror, it slowly rose again. Without hesitation, Nick fired another shot, but this time he missed the vital spot. Just as he prepared to fire once more, he realized his ammo was spent. The zombie was now closing in fast, leaving them no choice but to retreat into the car and slam the windows shut just before it reached them. They intended to call for help, but quickly remembered that the phone had been left outside. Now, their only option was to wait for the zombie to leave on its own before risking going back out to retrieve it. Unfortunately for them, this particular zombie was unusually persistent. It stood guard by their car well into the night, showing no signs of giving up or wandering off. Just when they were at their wits' end, the zombie suddenly vanished from sight. Scanning the area, they couldn't spot any trace of it. It seemed like the perfect moment to retrieve the phone. Without hesitation, the two got out of the car and began searching. Molly quickly found the phone on the ground, but just as she picked it up, the zombie attacked Nick from behind. In the face of this unexpected danger, Molly made a cold decision. She grabbed all the supplies from the car and left Nick behind, fleeing the scene without a second thought. She ran as fast as she could until her legs gave out, finally stopping to catch her breath. The next morning, Molly managed to call her friend at the airport, explaining the situation and asking them to wait for her. But before she could finish, the call was abruptly cut off as her phone lost signal. Determined, Molly hoisted her backpack and set off on foot toward the airport. She walked for hours, and before she knew it, night had fallen. As the cold desert night set in, Molly had no choice but to start a fire to keep warm. What she didn't expect was that the zombie, as if equipped with some kind of tracker, had been relentlessly following her every move. When the zombie drew near again, Molly used all her strength to shove it away and quickly scrambled onto a nearby large boulder. She scanned the surroundings but couldn't see the zombie anymore. Exhausted from the constant fear and running, she eventually dozed off. When morning came, Molly woke with a jolt, only to see that the zombie hadn't left. Fortunately, it didn't seem capable of climbing, or things would have been much worse for her. Molly was bewildered. How did this zombie keep finding her with such eerie precision? She tried to distract it by throwing sticks, but it didn't fall for her tricks. At that moment, Molly had a sudden realization. Could it be that the zombie had been following her because she was on her period? She quickly pulled out a used sanitary pad, and as soon as the zombie caught the familiar scent of blood, it became visibly more excited. Without hesitation, Molly threw the pad far away, and the zombie immediately chased after it, eagerly stuffing it into its mouth. Seizing this brief window of opportunity, Molly prepared to make her escape. Unfortunately, as she tried to run, she slipped and fell hard onto the ground. The sound caught the zombie's attention, and it abandoned the pad, turning its focus back on her. Panic-stricken, Molly scrambled to her feet and ran toward the campsite she had used earlier. She swiftly gathered her belongings and managed to leave just moments before the zombie could reach her. Although the zombie wasn't fast, it stuck to Molly like a relentless shadow, no matter how hard she tried to shake it off. If she paused for even a moment, there was a risk of being caught. Exhausted and physically drained, Molly couldn't afford to stop. She finally realized that as long as her period continued, she would never fully escape this undead stalker. Fortunately, as long as she kept a steady pace, the zombie couldn't catch up. The strange and silent chase went on for what felt like hours, until Molly finally spotted a dilapidated house in the distance. Desperate for a brief rest, she decided to take shelter inside. But it wasn't long before the zombie appeared outside once again. Panicking, Molly quickly hid in an old bathtub, her heart racing as she lay completely still. Scorpions crawled over her body, but she didn't dare make a sound. Luckily, the zombie didn't discover her. Once she was sure it was safe, Molly resumed her journey. However, just as she stopped for a quick drink of water, she spotted the zombie again, not far behind. It was maddening. Overwhelmed with frustration, Molly considered confronting the zombie in a final fight to the death. But as she remembered her boyfriend's tragic fate, she quickly abandoned the idea, forcing herself to keep moving despite her exhaustion. Molly eventually came to terms with the grim reality. If she couldn't shake off the zombie, she would have to coexist with it. She even began talking to it, giving the relentless pursuer a name, Smalls. Although Smalls couldn't respond, Molly kept up the conversation, interacting with the zombie as if it were a mute travel companion. That night, Molly camped on higher ground while Smalls continued to lurk nearby, ever present. The next day, she resumed her journey, with Smalls still trailing close behind. As she walked, Molly suddenly noticed something strange. The wind seemed to pick up dramatically. Looking up, she saw a massive sandstorm barreling toward her at a terrifying speed. It was too late to escape, and within moments, the storm engulfed her completely. When Molly finally regained consciousness, she saw a car approaching from the distance. Mustering her last bit of strength, she waved for help, and the two people in the car noticed her, stopping to assist. Relieved and exhausted, Molly couldn't help but laugh as she gratefully accepted the bottle of water they handed her, drinking it down in one go. The two strangers asked her a few questions about her situation, then helped her into the car, even offering to search for her lost backpack. Sitting inside the air-conditioned vehicle, Molly felt a sense of comfort she hadn't experienced in days. However, as her gaze drifted over the car's interior, she noticed a family photo. Something wasn't right. The people in the picture weren't the same as the ones who had just rescued her. A wave of unease washed over her. Molly turned to look at the back seat and was horrified to see a blood-stained piece of clothing. In an instant, it all made sense. These two people were murderers. She frantically thought of an excuse to escape, but before she could act, the two returned to the car. Her anxious demeanor made them suspicious, and in the next moment, the car doors locked. Suddenly, the man in the back seat slipped a plastic bag over Molly's head, dragging her out of the car, attempting to assault her. Her screams echoed across the desert, and the noise stirred Smalls, who had been buried under the sandstorm. The undead figure awoke, silently creeping up behind the man attacking Molly. The other man, terrified by what he saw, fled in a panic, accidentally dropping their supplies as he scrambled away. Molly, catching her breath, quickly gathered the fallen supplies. As she rummaged through the bag, she found an inflatable raft. Inspiration struck. She could use the raft to carry the supplies. Just as she was preparing to leave, she saw Smalls emerge once again. As Molly walked into an area filled with discarded tires, she glanced back at Smalls, and a bold idea suddenly struck her. She decided to make Smalls her zombie mule, tying the supplies to its back and letting it carry the load. This made Molly's journey much easier, lightening her burden significantly. Checking her phone, she realized that the airport was only a few kilometers away. She decided to tie Smalls to a post and finish the last stretch on her own. However, after only a few steps, Smalls began to wail, emitting a sorrowful sound. Remembering that Smalls had saved her life, Molly couldn't bear to leave it behind. She untied Smalls, curious to see if it would attack her. To her surprise, Smalls showed no sign of aggression. And so, a strange companionship was born. Molly and Smalls continued on their way together. Not long after, Molly spotted several military vehicles approaching in the distance. Worried for Smalls' safety, she quickly hid it by the roadside and stepped out to flag down the soldiers for help. But Smalls didn't understand Molly's intention. It broke free from its restraints and followed her out. As the soldiers were about to open fire, Molly quickly shielded Smalls, claiming it was her mutated husband. The soldiers, seemingly convinced, turned to leave. However, as the soldiers got into their vehicle, one of them suddenly turned around and shot Smalls without hesitation. The bullet left Smalls lying on the ground, unable to move again. Desperate, Molly tried to lift Smalls, but in the struggle, she accidentally injured her own finger. If left untreated, the bite could turn her into a zombie as well. Molly used the strong alcohol she had to disinfect the wound, but it did little to help. Realizing the severity of her situation, she made a grim decision. She picked up a heavy rock and forcefully smashed her bitten finger off. After quickly bandaging the wound, Molly returned to Smalls' side, though it lay there motionless. Molly couldn't bear to abandon Smalls, so she dragged it along with the inflatable boat, struggling every step of the way. After a long and grueling journey, she finally saw the airport within reach. However, Smalls was now barely alive. As Molly rummaged through Smalls' clothes, she found a wallet with a photo showing that Smalls had once been a handsome man with a beautiful wife. Realizing that she couldn't take Smalls with her and that leaving it behind would only lead to its death, Molly faced a heart-wrenching decision. She picked up a heavy rock from the roadside and, with great sorrow, ended Smalls' life. Soon, Molly arrives at the airport and meets up with her friend Jimmy, who has been waiting for her. Jimmy informs her that their group originally consisted of 4 people, but 2 of them were bitten by zombies and are now locked in a room. Meanwhile, the plane has been repaired and is ready to fly to Mexico. However, just as they are about to leave, Molly suddenly changes her mind. She decides not to go with them because she's thinking about her child still in the city. Molly used to be someone who spent all her time out and about, which led to her husband taking their son and leaving her. After surviving the apocalypse, Molly has come to realize the importance of family. She decides to return and be with her child. As Molly gets ready to leave, she discovers that the car keys are missing. Recalling Jimmy's words, she realizes the keys are likely with the mutated companion. Determined, she grabs a wrench and barges into the room where the zombies are kept. On the floor lies a corpse, but despite searching the clothes, Molly can't find the keys. She presses on deeper into the room. Suddenly, a zombie bursts through the door and lunges at her. Molly fights back fiercely, using the wrench to strike the zombie down. However, the keys are still nowhere to be found. Just as she's about to give up, she spots another zombie. Molly attempts to catch it by surprise, but the zombie suddenly turns, causing her to collapse in fear. The zombie advances without mercy, but in a desperate moment, Molly notices a power drill nearby. She quickly grabs it and decisively takes down the zombie. To her relief, she finally finds the keys on its body. With the keys in hand, Molly speeds back home in a convertible, her foot heavy on the accelerator. As she reaches the town, the scene is horrifying. Streets are littered with charred corpses and destruction. Molly grabs a shovel for protection and enters her house. Inside, she discovers that her husband has tragically passed away. She rushes upstairs, frantically searching for her son, but he's nowhere to be found. Just as despair begins to set in, she spots a small tent in the corner. Opening the tent, she finds her son hiding inside. The mother and child embrace in tears, but there's no time to mourn as they need to leave immediately. When they head downstairs, they find the house surrounded by a horde of zombies. Molly positions herself in front of her son, ready to fight off the zombies to the death. At this tense moment, the film abruptly cuts off. While the ending remains unseen, it's clear that Molly, driven by her love for her son, will fight with everything she has to break through the zombie horde.